Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today, inshallah, we will be responding to this video where a Christian thinks he solved the issues presented by the claim that Jesus didn't know the hour. Inshallah, we'll respond to every point he makes thoroughly, one by one.
Tell me when Jesus knew the hour. He himself said he doesn't know the hour apart from God.
Okay, can I explain the passage of the hour? Now, there is two interpretations with regard... I'm going to explain to you the two interpretations, okay? Okay, there's two interpretations with regards to Mark chapter 13, verse 32, where Jesus says he doesn't know the hour. Interpretation number one is that Jesus has two natures, a divine nature and a human nature. And the way in which he doesn't know the hour is by his human nature, but he does know it qua his divine nature, which is perfectly consistent with theology and philosophy within the Trinitarian tradition.
This explanation that this Christian apologist brings is heretical according to the Orthodox and Catholic positions. To say that Jesus does not know the hour or has a deficiency in knowledge in his humanity outside of not knowing the nature of the essence of God is a heretical view amongst Catholics, and because this person is a Catholic, it's not a viable way to respond to the criticism. I'll be providing a quote from a Pope and two quotes from Catholic theologians to prove my point. The first theologian is John Hardon, where he says, a sect of monophysites who held that Christ was subject to positive ignorance, the leading exponent of its error was Deacon Themistios of Alexandria. He was condemned by the Church, which declared that Christ's humanity cannot be ignorant of anything of the past or of the future. To attribute ignorance to Christ's human nature is to profess Nestorianism. Another Catholic theologian named Ludwig, Christ calls himself the Word, become man, the light of the world, which is come into the world in order to bring the true knowledge to mankind. He calls himself the truth and gives as the purpose of his coming into the world the giving of testimony to the truth. He permits himself to be called teacher. He is as holy witnesses, full of grace and truth, full of wisdom. In him are all treasures of wisdom and knowledge hidden. He knows about happenings which occur far away and sees through the heart of man. With this is irreconcilable the notion that Christ's human knowledge is defective or erroneous. And now here's a quote from our Pope. If anyone says that the one Jesus Christ, who is both true Son of God and true Son of Man, did not know the future or the day of the last judgment, and that he could know only as much as the divinity dwelling in him as in another, revealed to him, anathema sit, basically calling them heretics, those who claim this. Now, for the Protestants who hold to this view that Jesus didn't know the hour in his human nature, they can hold to this view and not be considered heretics. They can do this as they don't necessarily have to hold to any of these councils or any of these authorities. However, if a Protestant uses this rebuttal that Jesus didn't know from his human nature, but he knew from his divine nature, my response would just be that if Jesus doesn't know the hour from his human nature, and he does in his divine nature, that leads to two persons in Christ, which with each nature having its own knowledge, which is heresy called Nestorianism.
Now, the interpretation number two, this is the second interpretation, is that he actually did know the hour if you actually understand the Greek meaning of the term oidin, which is the word know in that passage. Now, the term oidin has a certain semantic range. It can also mean declaration. For example, Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 2 verse 2 says, I know nothing but Jesus Christ and him crucified. That doesn't mean that Paul only knows that. It just means that that's what he's declaring in the Greek context. So we understand by this word oidin. Wait, I'm still giving you the answer. We understand by this word oidin that it has a certain semantic range. And one of the ways that it can mean is that it can mean that he doesn't declare the hour, which we believe.
So if a word has a range of meanings, how do we then determine which sort of meaning we should be attaching to the word? The answer is the context, of course. It's like if I say the word bat, you don't know what I mean by the word bat until you hear the context in which it's being used. If I say there is a bat flying, or I hit the ball with a bat, you would have a better understanding of what I mean by the word depending on each sentence. The context of this verse in Mark clearly is aligning with the understanding that the type of knowing here is one of knowledge and not of declaration. Why is that the case? Well, it's because the verse right after says, be on guard, be alert, you do not know when that time will come. If we substitute the term know with declare here, it would make no sense. Be on guard, be alert, you do not declare when that time will come. That makes little sense. So the more appropriate translation for the Greek word for this should be knowing in the sense of knowledge.
And the reason why this works is because it's in the context of a Jewish wedding. When you read the parable after, it's talking about a bridegroom and virgins, okay? And Jesus is the bridegroom of the church. Now the reason why a Jewish wedding is relevant to this, because this is the context with which the passage was in. Now in first century Palestinian Jewish weddings, what would happen is you'd have a bridegroom and you'd have the father of the bridegroom. Now the father of the bridegroom would be the one to declare the hour of the wedding. However, the bridegroom would still know it, he just wouldn't be the one to declare it. Now what is the context of Jesus saying he doesn't know the hour? The hour is the hour of when he comes back to collect his church, which is his bridegroom. And because of that, he's not saying that he doesn't have intellectual knowledge of the hour, but he's saying he's not the one who declares it in a Greek context when you read the passage. And just why
the whole bridegroom justification for this type of interpretation of the Greek isn't valid, as the parable isn't used to portray the notion that Jesus doesn't declare. Rather, it's yet again portraying the idea that you should be careful because you don't know in terms of knowledge when the hour will come, so you should be prepared. The same way the wise 5 virgins brought oil with lamps, so should us be ready and anticipate the hour by preparing for it. We shouldn't be like the 5 unwise virgins, and when the hour came, they unexpectedly hurried to grab oil, but they were a little too late. Again, the emphasis is there in the parable that this is referring to knowledge and being able to navigate yourself with that lack of knowledge and preparing yourself. At the end of the parable, he goes on to say yet again, therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour, emphasizing this point again. If this meant by declare, then why should we keep watch? Because we don't declare the hour. What makes more sense is interpretation and positing that when Jesus says no, he means knowledge. To reinforce the idea that the apparent meaning of the text should be read as knowing in terms of literal knowledge is the fact that 2 early church fathers interpreted this passage in this way. Here's a quote from Irenaeus in his book Against Heresies, where he says, "But beyond reason, inflated with your own wisdom, ye presumptuously maintain that ye are acquainted with the unspeakable mysteries of God, while even the Lord, the very Son of God, allowed that the Father alone knows the very day and hour of judgment, when he plainly declares, but of that day and that hour knoweth no man, neither the Son, but the Father only. If then the Son was not ashamed to ascribe the knowledge of the day to the Father only, but declared what was true regarding the matter, neither let us be ashamed to reserve for God those greater questions which may occur to us, for no man is superior to his master." So clearly Irenaeus here is saying that Jesus didn't know the hour and he left that knowledge up to God. In the same way, we should leave the knowledge of the mysteries of God with God. Here's a second quote from another early church father, Athanasius, and his discourse with the Arians, where he says, "When his disciples asked him about the end, he said with precision, 'Of that day or that hour no one knows, not even he himself. That is, when viewed according to the flesh, because he too, as human, lives within the limits of the human condition. He said this to show that, viewed as an ordinary man, he does not know the future, for ignorance of the future is characteristic of the human condition, insofar as he viewed according to his divinity as the Word, who is to come, to judge, to be bridegroom. However, he knows when and in what hour he will come. For as upon becoming human, he hungers, thirsts, and suffers, along with all human beings. Similarly, as human, he does not see the future." So him being a human makes him unable to see the future. But viewed according to his divinity as the Word and wisdom of the Father, he knows, and there is nothing which he does not know. So he makes a distinction here. Jesus does not know, and he says he does not know, but this is according to his flesh. This is what Athanasius is saying, which was later to be deemed as heresy, as I mentioned before. So clearly, 2 early church fathers maintained the view that Jesus didn't know in his humanity, and this is because of the apparent reading of the text that they were reading at the time. Without forcing any later developed doctrines soon to come, they interpreted the know here as knowing in terms of knowledge and not declarance, as this apologist is trying to suggest.
Just one final point. If you actually read the Greek, you can take an interpretation that it just says, because it uses the word "me" at the end, you can take the interpretation according to Greek scholars such as Saint Basil, he says this in his work, letter 236, St. Basil says this. The words "e may" means if not. So the passage can also be translated as the Son does not know the hour, if not the Father, which is true because they share the same knowledge. If the Father didn't know the hour, neither would the Son. So no matter which way you want to slice the interpretation, Mark chapter 13.
Saying Jesus doesn't know the hour, if not the Father, is a translation that seems way out of place. I don't see any prominent translation relying upon this translation, as it doesn't make much sense that Jesus would say, "No one knows," and proceeds to say, "Neither the angels know," and builds it up to a point where Jesus is also mentioning himself. However, Jesus does actually know the hour, and is just making the convoluted point that had the Father not known, neither Jesus would have known. It seems way too confusing and just like a lot of mental gymnastics to force a harmonization of the text. So what this inevitably leads to now is, if you take the Orthodox or Catholic view and make a dogma that Jesus did know the hour, you're going against the apparent reading of the text, as well as the earliest understandings of the earliest, greatest church fathers. And you would have to deem their positions as heretical. However, if you're Protestant, what this leads to now is Nestorianism, which, as that Catholic theologian mentioned before, it leads to two persons in Christ, one not knowing and one knowing. So there's no real solution to this problem, whether you're Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant.